Welcome to Heal Through Humor, the podcast designed for you to learn about yourself and laugh along the way. In each episode, we'll explore the healing power of humor as I sit down with guests to talk about mental health, relationships, self-growth, and the ever-evolving world of social media. I'm your host, Talia Bombola. Let's get started. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Heal Through Humor. I am extremely excited for today's guest. Her name is Britt Frank, and her book is phenomenal. So I'm just going to lead right in with the good stuff. If you have not already gotten your hands on it, I highly recommend it. It's The Science of Stuck, and it changes the game when you think about procrastination. And I'm so glad that is a resource out there that I can recommend to my clients. And you are also a fellow LC. I'm an LMFT, but you're an LCSW. You're a fellow therapist. So I would love for you to just tell me your entire life story while I listen. I would love to learn more about what got you started, what inspired you to become a therapist, and then what inspired you to write the book. And then we'll just see what tangents we go on.
Cool. I don't know anybody in our field who got into our field who didn't need our field before they got into our field. Yeah.
And that is why we are therapists.
I've met a few who don't identify as having anything, no childhood stuff, no trauma stuff. And I'm kind of like, huh? Like, that doesn't make any sense to my brain. I would never.
Why would you want this job if you never had that?
I really feel like I've heard stand-up comedians say this about their industry. It's like,
sure. Yeah.
Choose that. It chooses you and it chooses you hard, and you're probably better off not being chosen by that particular craft. I think the same thing is true with therapists. So I came to this work from my own disastrous efforts at humaning prior to being less disastrous. And here we are.
So an effort in hopes of being slightly less disastrous, you turned it into a career. Yeah, same. Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have therapy when you were growing up, or did you more so need therapy but not have it? So
funny, because I come from a very New York Jewishy family, which you would think therapy would be like standard. It comes with the package, you get IBS, you get no boundaries, and you should have a therapist when you pop out.
Yes,
my family was not into therapy. They tried once. And I didn't like her. And so it was, well, you don't like her, so never again shall you.
Let's write off the whole thing.
That's it. And so even now, if I bring up like, why did you ever put me in therapy? Well, we tried. I'm like, yeah, but you tried once and it just wasn't a good fit. And for people listening, finding a therapist is like finding a pair of jeans. It's like, once you find the one that fits, it is awesome, but you spend a lot of time crying in the dressing room first. So it's never it's rarely a one and done. So no, I did not have therapy growing up, and I absolutely desperately needed it growing up. So I didn't understand certain things were not healthy. So with childhood trauma, it doesn't always feel bad while it's happening. That's one of my biggest things is you can have things that are terrible happen to you that don't feel terrible while they're happening to you. And that is very confusing to sort of parse out as you grow up. And so I didn't. And then, you get old enough, you start to get into drugs and sex, and that becomes ubiquitous. And so I did a lot of that. And then I tried fundamentalist religious cult life as a,
Okay, dabbled off that path. Okay.
It's not that different from methamphetamine. The cult of religion and the cult of meth is not actually all that far off from each other in terms of dynamics. How it's, how it shows up, how it looks is different. The legality of it is different. You're not going to OD on prayer. No. Well, I guess you could, but it's the extreme version of a lot of things, and none of that stuff works. None of that works. So then I got into therapy. I had some really bad therapy. I had some really good therapy. And it was when I found somatic therapy that things started to shift, and internal family systems. Like, oh, it's not just me. I have parts of me, and part of me is a child, and part of me is a toddler, and part of me is a teenager. Oh my God, that changed.
It changes.
And somatic work changed the entire trajectory. Like, I would be dead. And that's not an overstatement if I didn't have those two things.
Yeah, I often say as well. So I was the person who definitely needed therapy and lucked out and got therapy from a young age. So like the first session ever wasn't a good fit, but that therapist knew another therapist who is like, I still see her to this day, many, many, many years later. I just saw her recently, and she's like my guru go-to therapist who knows like my whole life story. And then I've seen other therapists along the way, but it really was that experience of having my brain and my frontal lobe almost develop on therapy was remarkably helpful. And like the level of wisdom that I have been able to attain from having that alone was life-saving. And especially when I first started, I was suicidal as a teenager and I was getting bullied like every day. And it was the advent of when like the internet had just come online and that was happening. So you literally couldn't escape it either. So I'm so glad. And my therapist did save my life because that hour or two a week that gave me an escape from that day to day was what I would look forward to. And then that's how I got started in like, oh, I could do this with other people. I could give this gift of presence and being fully attuned and securely attached. And I'm very partial to psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy and IFS as well. So knowing that we have those different parts and even looking back at my old journals of like a part of me feels, I'm like, why did nobody tell me about IFS sooner? Like this would have made so much more sense.
It is bonkers to me that we go through life not knowing that we know we have body parts, but not knowing that we have personality parts is just bananas as walking around thinking you don't have body parts. It's like no one has a problem identifying a hand, an arm, a neck. And yet with our personality, people all flip out at this notion of parts until you say to them, you've never had the experience of part of you knowing, don't do that. And the other part of you going, yes, do that. We all know it because that's how we're built. Everybody.
Yeah, we're familiar with that cognitive dissonance. And I think as we're younger in the psyche, not even about chronological age, and we don't have as many of those parts developed or attuned to or integrated, it feels very chaotic, very disrupted, and very disruptive to those around us. And I have the belief, one of many, but I have the belief that the person who ends up like breaking the chain in the family system or going to therapy or becoming the therapist is really giving a voice to the voiceless from previous generations, as well as like, this is too chaotic. I don't want to live in this anymore. We're not great at communicating. We're not great at emotional regulation. We're not great at distress tolerance and all the other DBT skills that I personally think everybody should have from like middle school and beyond. Like so many problems could be thwarted if we all learn those skills. But by all means, the Pythagorean theorem, because I use that every day. Ridiculous. We should be getting, yes, that's a whole other tangent, but being able to know that we have different parts and part of maturing is understanding we're responsible for those and we're also responsible for regulating them, but also knowing when we can't do it all ourselves. Do I need to reach out and do some somatic work? I like energy practices as well. So I recommend if we can't move it verbally to do somatic work, to do Reiki, to do some sort of other like different plane or different level of the psyche, let's go in and really figure out what's going on for you so you don't have to be in pain and suffering. And your life doesn't have to be this way. Even if you've been told it, or you're the one who's telling yourself it'll never get any better. I'll just be stuck here. So I would love it if you could talk about kind of what allowed you or what dawned on you to want to write the book. Cause it's a very daunting process to write a book. I'm going through it myself right now. So
yes. For this, we all support, I have some really amazing colleagues who are also authors, and oh my gosh, it's like, yes, we have to support each other and lift each other up because it is quite the journey. So I think most people have a book in them, and why this book was after I had sort of gotten myself to a place where I looked around and life was working and I was generally pretty happy. I mean, no one is always happy. But my life was not a chaotic disaster, like burning down every second of every day. And I looked at all like my notes and I realized I had amassed a lot of just little snippets of wisdom from all.
That's what I've done. Perfect.
No, you're because I don't just practice one theory. I love philosophy. I love science and math and physics. I mean, I don't love physics, but I love certain physics principles.
Exactly.
And when I looked at it all, I'm like, the decades I spent having to learn all this shit. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I swear on your podcast?
Please.
Okay. Yes. The decades I spent learning all this shit was totally unnecessary. And so I didn't come up with a lot of what's in my book. My book is, hey, I'm really good at synthesizing and taking what I think is the most important information. It's sort of like a curation. Like, here's what I think the most important thing about trauma ended up being for me. Here's what I think the most important thing, but it's not like, here's Britt Frank's way to live your life. Like I have my theories on grief in there, but by and large, the book is, hey, everybody, here's the one book with all the things. So you don't have to try to dig around in the, because when you're in crisis, like I took during my cult years, I had all day where I was supposed to be praying, and I would be reading Richard Schwartz, and I would be reading Bessel van der Kolk. And so while I was supposed to be doing X, I had the time to sit and read a bajillion books. And I wrote this book because it's the one I wish I had had when I was 18 and starting.
Yes. Okay. That helps. First of all, thank you for sharing that. It helps me on a personal level to feel comfortable about the books that I'm writing. And second of all, it sounds like we're very similar in that, because I love ingesting podcasts and consuming media and books and reading. And like, I'm definitely a nerd when it comes to self-help. Actually now more than even years ago, when most of the time people have their first foray into like, oh, I should read a book on this. And then you're like, oh, this changed everything for me. I learned I had more interest like later on as I understood it, and to amass that much knowledge and synthesize it. I have like, it's called the Insight Masterclass, and I've created it of like all my 5 to 10 years of research and beyond of like, this will help you. There's no way that knowing all of this about yourself will hurt. It might not feel great, but it will lay a foundation. It can shave off, not that we're in a rush, but it can shave off some of that awkwardness in the beginning of therapy where you're both looking, you're like, I don't really know myself. You don't really know me either. So this feels weird to like tell you about somebody I don't know. I'm not this person yet. Like it's this weird part of me. So it gives people a foundation to work from. And so part of, I think, authoring a book is really going back in your own notes and your own journal, depending on the type of book, and explaining what you wish you would have known back then. And it's not again, it's not rushing, but it's a shortcut, because we actually don't need every single person to read every single book we've read to yield the results or to glean the knowledge that we were able to. I think that can be remarkably helpful because it helps people get unstuck in your case.
Exactly. And I found a lot of the neuroscience information, which a lot of people don't realize, that therapists can become licensed and fully operational without ever learning about the brain. Like that is like a true story.
I have been talking about it for weeks, and people are like, first of all, they're like, what gives you the qualifications? I'm like, well, aside from schooling and licensure, I've dedicated so many of my off hours to like reading so much about neuroscience, consuming X amount of podcasts, research, data, doing my own research. Like we can become very educated in it, but most of the time nobody's focusing on the brain. My personal fascination is how different sex hormones and neurotransmitters impact our brain and behavior. And just as a human species, how do we function? What does testosterone make us do? What does estrogen make us do?
Right. And did you learn any of that in graduate school, getting your LMFT?
Of course.
No. And nobody knows that. I didn't know that. That's like saying a doctor who never has to like look inside and figure out how to do surgery on a body. But it's true. And that was so unfortunate to not know. I think the therapy world does people a great disservice by not disclosing the limitations to our training.
Thank you for bringing that point up. It does. And therapy, in terms of learning different communication styles, the validity of emotions, how to regulate them, like there are a certain set of therapy skills that I think do apply across the board. Like we ought to know them. I think they would be more helpful than harmful in any given standard. And each person's neurochemistry will be different depending on multitudes of factors, namely, what was your upbringing like? What were you exposed to when you were in utero developing? What leading hormone do you have acting upon your brain? What are some of the other experiences that you've had that have shaped that? It's like, it's not just nature and nurture, because if you experience something for so many times, it does change your brain chemistry and your biochemistry. So the societal and cultural influences really can rewire the brain. So I think it's not either or. I think it's both and I was talking about that with my students this morning. Like it really does change, like the biobases of behavior. Knowing that would help so much with couples where they're fighting in this and emotionality. I'm like, okay, that's not the way testosterone works in the brain. So why don't we try it this way? And they're like, yeah, we stopped fighting about it. Like so much easier to know where the brain chemistry is coming from and not feel like you're incompetent, because sometimes therapy does make people feel like we've tried all the skills, we've done everything. Why isn't this person changing? Well, first of all, it's not our job to change them. Second of all, they might not be behaviorally conditioned the right way in terms of the change being like something that they want to have happen. Most people are motivated to change if they can yield something from it rather than only to avoid punishment. Like, we know this from just classical behavioral conditioning. So I think being able to include all of it plus therapeutic skills is like the best way, if we could argue.
Yes. So that's a very long-winded way to say I wrote this book because it didn't exist. And I wanted to bring the academic, like it can be really fluffy in academia. And I don't think it's necessary to use multisyllabic phrasing and words to just, like, I turned polyvagal theory into a cartoon because it's a lot easier to understand it when you're looking at little people on a swing set than to have to read, through research papers. So I'm really big on, like, I write the way I speak. Let's make it accessible. Let's make it so you don't have to have a biology degree to understand what you're reading. And I love synthesizing different fields because I don't like to spend my time in so that's my neurodivergent brain that has to be everywhere. And like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. So the science of stuck is really my show and tell from all of my brain pings around the world.
I love it. Would you say that it's impacted your work with clients positively?
Yeah, it's nice to be able to save them time and money and just be like, read this, because I spend a lot of time in therapy doing education because I don't think our job as therapists is to fix people or to heal people.
I agree.
It's to inform them of choices and then they can do or not do whatever they want. So my first 2 sessions with people are usually, here's your brain, here's what's happening. And so the book that gets, it's like, here, now you have that. So you don't have to, and we don't have to spend time doing it in session.
Exactly. Yes. Let's have you have a place or a resource to educate yourself so this can be streamlined. I'm all about that as well. I don't think it's definitely not our job to heal or fix people. And if we have certain knowledge, like, I don't gatekeep it all. I'm like, here, do this. Here. They're like, how did you know that? I'm like, here's the book. It's not like some magical thing that some voice told me one day. And they're like, you are the chosen one. Here's the knowledge and information, like, gatekeep this. It's like, no, I just read this book or I listened to this podcast. And some of the times I'll give it to them. They're like, I don't want to listen to that. It's 3 hours. And I'm like, okay, well, you asked and I answered. So moving on, like, next session.
Classical therapy training really treats it like stage magicians, where it's, I will not reveal my secrets. And it's like, no, I want you to know what I know because I want you to hold space, but how much more amazing when you can take what you now know and, like, apply it to your life outside the session space. But no, there is no merit in keeping this information secretive. This is not a magician society. Like, I want everyone to know what I know.
Yeah. Yes. And if by any way that were true, we would already have been out of a job. If simply having books and podcasts exist were enough, like, I think it's safe to say that's not what's going to keep us in or out of business. Like, we all have a place for it. But it would be really cool, though, sometimes if we were magicians.
Right?
Where'd your frustration go? Oh, here it is. They're like, how did you get it out of me? And now, time for an ad break. Hey there, listeners. We're interrupting your favorite podcast to bring you a special message from our friends over at Therapy Swag. Are you tired of the same old boring wardrobe? Ready to add a dash of sass and style into your closet while repping mental health? Look no further than Therapy Swag, your go-to online store for snarky shirts and mugs. Their products make awesome gifts for friends, family, or anyone in need of a little pick-me-up. They're on a mission to break the stigma surrounding mental health. They use humor and creativity to open up dialogue, challenge stereotypes, and remind us it's okay to not be okay. Because let's face it, laughter is the best medicine. So why settle for ordinary when you can stand out with Therapy Swag? Head over to their website today and treat yourself to some snarky goodness. Trust us, your wardrobe and your mood will thank you. Thanks to our sponsor for supporting the show. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
I think a lot of people get into the field because from a real genuine desire to be helpful. And I was not that altruistic. I was way more, I do love being able to support people and being able to, but like, I did not get into this field to help people. It was, oh my God, this is so cool. I want everyone to know this, just because all I want to do is talk about it and talk about the nervous system. So it came much more out of a fascination with this human experience. And it just happened to be helpful and useful to people's lives.
Yes. That's such a good point that you bring up. Not everybody, I mean, I can tell even from my own graduate school experience, definitely not everybody got in it for the same reasons. There are people I'm like, you've never been I'm sorry, you've never been to therapy ever, like at all? They're like, no, I've only ever seen it on TV. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be like watching Grey's Anatomy only and then being like, okay, I'm ready to do, it's like, no, you have to have, I think at least for therapy specifically, it helps so much with empathy and skill development and validation, just being real in the room to know what it's like to have sat both on the couch and in the chair and having that experience. It's not, that's not what makes a therapist qualified to give therapy by any means, but I think it makes a more well-rounded experience. And it also lets you know, like, wow, a lot's coming up for me, transference wise. I got to address that in my own therapy or consultation or supervision. If you're still under supervision, I think it's a gift to be able to go and hear yourself out loud and still have that therapeutic experience, especially even more so when you become a therapist. But not everybody gets into it to be a helper, a giver. I think there's like the martyr complex that comes up. There's sometimes the narcissistic God complex that comes up. There's this changed my life and I want to give back in that way. But I don't think there's anything by the definition like true altruism. Even if you're doing it because it makes you feel good, you are getting something in return. Like by default, I don't think there's one thing you could do that you get absolutely nothing in any direction in return.
Rational self-interest. But I'm with you, a therapist. And again, if for who's ever listening to this, it's important to know that therapists are not mandated to have ever been in therapy. And again, that is just because if a therapist has never been in therapy, that means they have never formally tried to create a container to work on their stuff. And countertransference is a very big deal. And even if you don't have trauma, which I would push back on, but like, let's say you had the perfect life, you're going to get triggered by your clients. So where's the container to work through that? And that's a big deal. So yes, I'm a big advocate. And that doesn't mean I don't go to therapy every week. When I was writing the book, I did I did classic Jungian psychoanalysis every single week because writing that book brought up so much stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I don't do it every week regularly. I go through seasons where it's monthly or every other week. And then when I'm in a big deal mode, then I'll do it weekly.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've been in it on and off for over 15 plus years, very long time. So like, it's not like, oh, I'm fully cooked, well-oiled machine by any means. And I remember being in grad school and having more of like a defensive position about it, because when we were doing peer interviews for one of the practicum sites, many other peers at that level were like, I've never been, this is my first job, I've never worked with clients, which is fine. Like it's grad school. It's not everybody's mandated or required to have had any experience before. I was a little bit different in that sense. And I was one of the only people in at least this one interview cohort who had ever been to long-term therapy or with a therapist for a long amount of time. And so one of the questions, he ended up being one of the best supervisors I've ever had, but he's like, so you just come in here and you're just like fully cooked, ready to go, whatever else. And I remember at the end of that training year looking back and being like, yeah, I did have a lot to learn. Like true, in some ways I was fully cooked in what I was, but I didn't even know how much either places I could be cracked open and learn. And I'm so glad that I pushed through that. And he went to Pacifica. So very depth-based, very like, that's my favorite. I like the level of insight that sunk the Titanic. That's what I joke about, like depth, like bottom of the ocean. That's my safe space. And for most people, they're like, I'm good. I'm surface only. I'll snorkel. We're all set. I don't want to go there.
I love it so much. At some point, I'm going to go to Pacifica and just sit and just nerd out on Jungian depth psychology all day, every day. I don't have I shouldn't say I don't have the time. I have chosen to prioritize other things in my life right now. Therefore, I've chosen a full plate that doesn't have room for that. But do I love the mythology and the archetypes. It just makes the drudgery of life so much more magical. And it makes experiencing the like just day-to-day life. It's like, no, it's like, I saw a meme. It was like, imagine that you're not going to CVS, you're going to the apothecary to get your potions. And that's so much more fun. And if you're going to negotiate trauma, having archetypal psychology as a tool is very useful, particularly not particularly, any kind of trauma. It's useful to have something bigger and grander and greater to bring awe and wonder back in, because trauma completely destroys any creativity or curiosity or wonder or awe. Like that is yanked away and held for ransom. Yes.
Very well said. I also think it's helpful I see a lot of couples and couple relationships, because so much of it is projective identification and projections that we have to almost interrupt the cycle of, we can't stop it from happening in its genesis, but I think leaning in and being able to interrupt or offer an analysis or offer a possibility of what it could be. You know, when you experience your partner in this way, do you ever see them as this? Is there this, the good mother, the bad mother, the maiden lover, all these other archetypes that come up, and they're like, oh, because sometimes I've had clients feel guilt and shame. They are thinking of an archetype, but they've embodied it in a real person that they know. Either the individual self knows or the couple knows. And that can feel intrusive. That can elicit a lot of jealousy or envy, potentially. It's like, no, it's not about her. It's like her essence. It's his this, like giving them archetypal language and having them have, like, I'll give them a list sometimes of like, okay, pick what it is. I'm just going to give you a shortcut because you guys want to get to the solution. Like, they're like, that's what it is. That's how it feels. I see them as this and not as this. I'm like, okay, now we can get somewhere, because you can catch yourself in that projection after a lot of analysis and go, wow, I was just about to treat you like my dad, and you're not my dad, you're my husband. That'd be weird. So I'm going to take this to my own container, process it, and then we can come back and do the couples work. Yeah, it gives common language in another direction that I think can get rid of a lot of, or ameliorate in some ways, and make less intense a lot of the guilt and shame that people often feel.
And I love that you said that about couples. I do not do couples work. My nervous system I can speak in front of people, but
sure.
If we're doing in it one-on-one, I can't do couples, but I choose not to, and it's not my skill set. It is an art form that I don't have the skills for. But if I were to do couples therapy, the very first thing I would tell every couple who's about to have an argument to do is to look at each other in the eye and say, I am not your mother. I am not your father. I am not your sister. I'm not your neighbor, just to properly orient their nervous systems to where and when the argument is happening. Because most arguments go fine when we know who we are and who we are and what we are. And then our frontal cortex takes a little trip back to the past, and all of a sudden everyone's projecting everything, and it's a big hot mess.
Mm-hmm. And we're not in our actual current state. We're not in the most integrated versions of ourselves by any means. Yes.
Right.
Sirens in the distance. The parts are on fire. Yeah. That is definitely how it feels. I'm glad that you brought that up. I bring that up with my couples as well. Like, you got to take a breath. And often, especially depending on where we're at in our hormonal cycles, if we're at if we haven't slept, like looking at DBT skills too, like, have your basic biological needs been met or not? Are you at a certain point in your cycle where your hormones are going to be at different levels? So you're not seeing them as like this nice person, like your progesterone's not as high as it usually is. So you're like the dragon version of yourself. You're not as calm. And they're like, okay. And I was listening to a podcast this morning with one of, I would consider her a mentor, though I've not talked to her, but I like her work a lot. Dr. Luann Brizendine. And she was saying that when couples come in to see her, she'll recommend they write whatever the issue is down, and then in 4 days, pull it from the drawer and see if it's actually that big of a deal. Because really, for couples, depending on what hormonal phases they're at, it can make a world of difference if something's even worth having a conflict over.
It's so true. I'm laughing because this morning, I was in a kind of a teary, watching commercials, making me cry kind of state. And my husband said something which was totally neutral. And I was like, are you mad? I went into little regress, and he started like, no, I'm fine. And then he stopped. He's like, wait a second. He's like, are you luteal right now? I said, I am. Yes. He's like, oh, okay. Then he gave me a hug. He's like, everything's fine. It's fine. And, having that type of knowledge for couples, like, again, if you identify as a menstruator, that's really helpful, because the 5 days prior to when I start, I'm not rational. And we don't have arguments or discussions of big things during those 5 days, because I will not be my best, most integrated, rational self. And it's really helpful it doesn't mean that he's now expected to tiptoe around me. He needs to indulge in my boundary. It's none of that. It's just, if he is aware that I am not myself, then that just helps guide how the relational dynamic can go, and which conversation topics should probably wait till Monday.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I talk about this. It feels nice to just talk to somebody else's brain who like gets it like that, because I've talked to people and I get not everybody's in the headspace to either have a space to hear it or like wants to hear it, because some people, especially certain phases, they want to be in the mood that they're in. And it's like, I'm not invalidating what's happening. It's really just being constructive. Similarly, in a different parallel, if you needed to talk to your boss about something and they had just gotten very bad news, probably not the best time to bring that up, and you would wait to get the better reaction. That is exactly what we can do in our friendships and relationships if we know the other person's nervous system or biochemistry is not its typical as we know itself. Maybe wait until it is, and the ability to have grace and empathy for ourselves and our partner or a friend or family member goes up tenfold. A lot of the teens I work with have intense PMDD, and their parents are struggling naturally with already parenting a teenager. Then you add in this mood disorder that's coming into it. It is very chaotic for everyone involved. So being able to explain the neuroscience of it helps at least address what might be going on underneath, even if it doesn't change it. But then we can actually get somewhere with it and maybe do some lab testing and have them potentially, if medication is something they're choosing or supplementation, we can mitigate some of the negative fallout, even if we can't prevent it from ever coming up, obviously.
Well, it takes the stigma off of it.
Exactly.
It doesn't change anything, but it does change our orientation to it, which that I really thought I was crazy and I have severe mental illness on both sides of my family. And I don't believe in crazy anymore. There's a lot of books that talk about this, but if you look up close, every symptom makes sense, even symptoms we don't understand. And so psychosis makes sense in context. Too much dopamine is going to create a whole mess of symptoms. And so it's so helpful to know, even if you don't know why exactly your brain is doing a thing, like the number one intervention I like to leave people with is don't ask why, just validate you have a brain and your brain is braining. And when brains brain, things feel weird. So let's just start with, this is not me being crazy. There's no such thing as crazy. My brain is braining. That's what's happening. And then it's, okay, what can I do? What are my choice points?
Yes, I think, if we're in the context of like a psychoanalytic container or when we're not as activated, why could be a cool journey to go on. But trying to elicit that from somebody who is not on the same, I call it the human elevator. So you have like your gut floor, your heart floor, and your head floor, the rational and the emotional. But really, if you're not on the same floor when you're starting a conversation, especially a conflict, which is a form of connection, if we think about it, we're going to be shouting up and down the elevator shaft at one another. And that is literally why arguments start to come true, because you're not seeing things from my perspective. That is, I don't use the word either, but I've heard it used colloquially, that is crazy making. It makes me feel like I'm not in the reality that you are in, that's in front of both of us, because I need emotional validation, at least just recognizing that I'm on my emotion floor before I want to journey up with you to the logic floor, or vice versa. I might still be in that rationalization mode that helps me be safe, and it's something I'm coping with before I can feel, oh my gosh, this is really painful. You want to let people be there and invite them, not force them or jam their elevator on a certain floor. That's what I tell all the people I work with.
I hope you're putting that in your book, because I love that metaphor of and that works relationally out with partners, but it also works with parts. If you think about the elevator, if parts of me are on one floor and other parts of me are on the other, that right there cracks the whole procrastination thing wide open. Because procrastination is by definition, one part of you is over here and another part is over there. Now there's a polarity and everyone is stuck. I could not love that elevator analogy more. So that's brilliant.
This is so validating.
We're on the same floor right now.
I love it. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Thank you. I will put that in the book. I've explained it more in like because it can translate into any relationship type. It's not only a romantic relationship. I think everything becomes amplified in a romantic relationship, mainly due to how many projections this person is housing for us and like the societal expectations that our partner should be or could be all or everything. And I love when I work with couples, I'm like, do you ever, like not follow through on your own word to yourself, or like tell yourself you're going to go to the gym and then not? And I'll say it like that. They're like, yeah, all the time. And I'm like, so like one could say maybe that like you don't even uphold all of your own standards and expectations. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, so why would we, just go with me on this, if you will, why would we assume anybody else would? And they're like, that's a fair point. Or some of them are like, shit, you make a good point. That's super true, which it is. You can't hold people to, even if you were able to uphold all of your standards, they're a separate self. They might have similar parts, and they might have similar floors of their elevator, but each person is unique when it comes to exactly how their childhood and adolescence has overlaid into their biochemistry and the neuroscience of human beings into what we present as and how well integrated we are also makes a huge difference.
Not to mention, when you have two people together, you have like 90 parts. That's why I don't do couples work. It's like, if you don't know you're made of parts, then you're really not going to know that your partner is made of parts. Or if you have multiple partners, now you've got 3 nervous systems and 3 subsets of personalities in the room, and 3 family of origin histories and roles and dynamics. I mean, oh my gosh, no wonder things don't work. It's like, oh yeah, life is a lot easier when you understand a little bit about the dynamics of just how we human. And I did not know how to human, and it's really nice now to be able to have these kinds of conversations, because no one was talking about them. The movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie, I think did a huge thank you for making that movie, because it really crystallized the conversation around the multiplicity of minds.
Yes. And it really does feel like that at times, where one person's like at the control panel, like full throttle, like anger. For my brother and I were joking about that because he hadn't seen it even a few years after it came out. And I remember being on a break one day and I went over to his house and I'm like, all right, let's watch it. And mind you, he's, with his own emotions. Everybody is different. And I've seen it before. So I know like if you've seen any movie, you know when you're going to react or not. And he was able to express like the multiplicity of emotions that come up with it. And then I was like, okay, I got to go. And he's like, you're just going to leave? Like, I need someone to process this with. This was like cute, but also emotional, but this and this. I'm like, I can talk to you about it later. But it was like, he's like, wow, that really did take me on a journey. I'm like, yeah, it's a great movie. And it helps too with any age to be able to watch that and be like, oh my gosh. But he was joking because I'll send him the anger gif and he's like, that is so you. I just like go for it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. That is out of it. This, oh my God, I'm made of parts. It's like, that's so helpful to the more we're afraid of what's inside our head, the more we're going to do really stupid shit to avoid what's inside our head. And the stuff we do to avoid our reality ends up making our reality 100-fold worse. So I love that Pixar made it cute and fun to approach this like rage and sadness. And all of the things.
Disgust and my favorite was when they did the mom and dad brain, or the mom's like nudging. Oh, he never pays attention. They're all watching sports, and it's like, wait, the look, alert! like we gotta act like we're alert, because that is when I work with couples. That is so much of what I see, and even with individuals, I'm sure they'll reference discussions with other people in their life that it's like. And I bet they were. My favorite is when clients are like, and I know they said this, or and I said that. I'm like, did you literally say that? And they're like, well, no, but I thought about it. And I was like, well, why don't we practice for you next time to say a version of that feels congruent and authentic to you and also kind and respectful of whatever the dynamic is. They're like, okay. And then that's how the assertive training builds, because they have that foundation. We win most of our arguments in the shower, as the joke goes, but we often feel so much more comfortable saying what we wish we would have said to the person, rather than learning how to regulate and not calm like it's an invalidation, but to really calm ourselves to be able to stay effective in times of crisis or in heat of the moment discussions. We care about that person. We don't want our relationships to be threatened. And that does act on our bodies and our brains intensely when we love the person.
True story. I love that you just differentiated regulated from calm. This is like, I'm really glad we're talking in the zeitgeist about somatics and the nervous system, but somehow like regulation is the new flex. I'm like, oh dear. Okay. Well, regulate.
Like, buckle up. Let's do this.
Right. Okay. So somehow the nervous system regulation became the thing. It's like it's a trendy thing to have, but like regulation doesn't equal calm. Regulation just means you're within a window where you're not being driven by your impulses, that you can express your anger in a skillful way. You can feel it and express it skillfully, not calm. Regulation is not calmness. That drives me a little bananas when that's equated. Like, no.
Yes,
I'm regulated right now, and I'm angry. I'm very regulated.
I see it on posts sometimes, and I'm like, not worth the comment. I'm not going to do. I'm not the person who like get in a debate. I mostly see the comments as like, cool, nice, like great perspective. Like I just maybe that's just the way that my brain works, but I've seen other people do it too. Like I use it ideally for positive interaction, not to like start an argument with a stranger on the internet. That doesn't get me going at all. But that the difference between that and a lot of the parents that I work with teens I see too, they expect, I mean, this could be a whole other episode. They expect a certain behavior based on their own family of origin, what was tolerated or acceptable in their own family system, what they might feel jealous or envious of. Their teen is able to express that they never were. Like parenting brings up a lot. And when we're talking about being regulated, they expect sometimes that they'll never express discontent or never express feeling unappreciated or being able to share, hey, mom, dad, parent, whoever, that was invalidating. I know your intent wasn't that, but that's the impact of it. And I need some repair. Like, they're learning all of these communication skills, and the parents will come in and they're like, I really wasn't expecting them to be this mature or to have to learn to talk to them like an adult when they're at this age. And I was like, well, let's just put these away. And they're human at the baseline, and they're an adult in training. If you want to bring back the quotes, what better way to start them on this? And if you didn't get that in your adolescence or ever, I get how uncomfortable it is to see your little version of you, in a way, talk to you, which the little version of you gets activated, and it's like, wait a second, I wish I could have said that when I was their age. How do I cope with this? But then there's the power dynamic and this, and there's so much that goes into it. Oh, I could talk about it forever.
Oh, I'm thinking, I don't remember where I heard it, but it was like, kids nowadays are allowed to say things like, I don't feel safe in this conversation. Back in my day, we just got hit. We all turned out fine. Like, but did you? Like, did you though? Is one. And two, I was a play therapist early in my career, not because I love kids, which I do now, but because I wanted to understand how kids interpret things, because they're not like, we think that kids are just resilient and they bounce back. And it's like, no, kids have a whole language that's going on. And there's a way in which a skillful parent can hold space for a child without it meaning that now there's no boundaries. Again, just like regulation got equated with calm, validation got equated with permission. And you can validate a kid all day long while giving zero, no
permission. It's not like anything goes.
Right. You can do, I understand you feel this. This is DBT 101.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Feelings set the boundary. I know you hate me right now and you're having big feelings and we don't hit. I know that blah, blah, and this is the rule. And validation is not permission and regulation is not calm.
Yeah. Mic drop right there. I feel like that's the messaging that I would want to get out there more in the world. So I'm very appreciative that you shared that, because that is the case. It's not letting anything go. You're allowed to set boundaries in a kind way, and being kind is not the same thing as being nice.
Yes.
Being kind is, I'm going to tell you the truth, not intending for you to be hurt, but even if it hurts or the outcome is not pleasant for you, the kind thing to do is be honest and be accountable. The nice thing to do is more of like the people pleasing tendency that's also trending right now, that terminology, but it's saying what's socially acceptable to keep the peace and what is considered nice, or again, in an effort to keep the peace. I'll just say what I think you want to hear, rather than I'm going to tell you what I need to say or what I need you to hear, and we'll deal with the aftermath afterwards. I'll use a calm tone. I'll use collaborative language. I will validate what's valid. But even in DBT, they talk about that. You don't validate everything. Even if just one thing is valid, only validate what is valid, and then no over apologizing, stick to your values, be fair. Like, all of the interpersonal effectiveness skills come into play.
That's so true. Niceness is sort of like the sugar of emotions, and kindness is sort of like the vegetables. Like, you don't always want to eat vegetables, and sugar always tastes good going down. But if you look at the impact of both over time, niceness will usually result in some sort of chronic condition that you are very, very displeased with. And eating vegetables over time, I'm just making this up as we go. Kind of like liking this analogy. Kindness is broccoli, niceness is sugar.
Yes, I love it. That's exactly what it's like. And thank you for bringing that up. I feel like we should do a reel or something on that so people can learn more.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, let's do how to differentiate common terms 101 with food, because I grew up in culturally very Jewish. My mom was raised in the Bronx, so I have a lot of that culture interwoven in me, and then also German and Italian. So there's a lot of that like European Italian mafioso with like the very Catholic, but also like the Bronx Catholic Jewish culture as well. So it's like a full combination. So yeah, what better way to learn about things than with food?
I love it.
Love it. Yes, thank you so much for a rousing episode. I would love to have you back on if you would like to for a different topic. These were all tangents. By the way, none of this is scripted. We just went with it, which is my favorite thing to do. And I think it went very well.
Yay. Oh, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
You're so much fun. Yeah, I am happy to geek out with you on
Cool.
this stuff anytime.
Awesome. Cool. I also feel like I made a friend. This feels good.
Yes, it does. My nervous system is very regulated in your presence. You have a beautifully integrated system.
Oh, thank you. What a compliment. I've worked for years on it.
It shows.
My therapist would be proud.
You don't
Oh,
at all. You have this beautifully contained, like, you know where you stop. And it's, yes, thank you. You make me feel so regulated.
Oh, that's the best Valentine. You make my nervous system regulated. Yeah. I love it.
Right? Thank you for co-regulating me in my time of need.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I look forward to talking with you soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Heal Through Humor. If you like the show, can you please go on your favorite platform and like, rate, review, subscribe, all of the terms that we usually throw out. I would really appreciate it, and I would love to get more listeners just like you in front of the podcast. And if you have an idea for a guest, please feel free to DM me at Talia Bombola. I would love to hear from you. Until then, I will see you on the next episode. Take care.